Okay, so yesterday, March 21st, 2025, huge news from the White House.
Big announcement.
Yeah, President Trump unveiled what he called the Air Force's new F-47 fighter jet.
But not just any fighter jet,
No, no, this is being billed as the world's first sixth-generation fighter.
which is a big deal. And as you said, it's the manned part of what the Air Force is calling the Next Generation Air Dominance Platform, or NGAD for short.
So a lot of jargon being thrown around, a lot of excitement from the White House, but we wanted to kind of dig into what we know so far and what makes this F-47 significant.
Yeah, cut through all the noise.
Exactly. So we've been poring over, the official statements, some early analysis from experts, and the initial specs that have been released.
Trying to bring the key takeaways to our listeners.
So to kind of set the stage, picture the White House briefing room, President Trump at the podium, and he's got Defense Secretary Hegseth on one side and Air Force Chief of Staff General Alvin on the other.
Classic Trumpian rollout.
Totally. And he was very enthusiastic, in typical Trump fashion, calling the F-47 the most advanced, capable, and lethal combat aircraft platform ever built.
Ever built.
Ever built, yeah. And he really hammered home that world's first claim.
That seems important to him.
Oh, definitely. And then the other big reveal was that Boeing had snagged the contract for developing and producing the F-47.
Beating out their rivals, Lockheed Martin.
Yep. So, big win for Boeing, and the whole event really underlined the administration's emphasis on American military strength.
Projecting power.
Yeah. Now, of course, the big question is what actually makes this thing a sixth-generation fighter?
Right. What sets it apart?
So let's break that down. So
Yeah.
the F-47 is designed to operate as part of what they're calling a network-connected family of systems.
Connected how?
Well, a key part of that is these unmanned drones. Officially, they're called Collaborative Combat Aircraft, or CCAs.
So the F-47 isn't alone out there.
Right. It's leading a pack, essentially. And the whole system is supposed to eventually replace the aging F-22 Raptors.
Okay, it makes sense.
Now, in terms of actual advancements, they're talking about next-generation stealth capabilities, which means it's supposed to be even harder to detect than current stealth aircraft.
Wow, even stealthier.
Yep. Significantly longer range, too, and there are hints that it'll have superior speed and maneuverability compared to its predecessors.
Which suggests pretty big leaps in engine technology and aerodynamics.
Exactly. They're keeping a lot of the details under wraps for now, but it's pretty clear they've made some major advancements.
Gotcha. Now, I remember reading something about sensor fusion. What was that all about?
Yeah, so sensor fusion basically means the F-47 can take in data from all sorts of different sensors and combine it into a single clear picture for the pilot.
So better situational awareness.
Exactly, and that ties in with another key capability, which is long-range strike. So not just defending, but also being able to hit targets far away.
And I know we mentioned those drones, the CCAs. How do they fit into all of this?
That's where the whole human-machine teaming concept comes in. So think of the F-47 as the quarterback on the field.
Okay, I like that analogy.
It can control and coordinate a whole fleet of these drones. So it's not just about the capabilities of the F-47 itself, but also its ability to direct and leverage these unmanned assets.
Really interesting.
Oh, and there's more. It's also expected to carry a larger payload of weapons and equipment than previous fighters, and it'll have some pretty sophisticated AI built into its systems to help the pilot make decisions.
AI in the cockpit.
Yeah, it's the future of warfare. And then another thing that's pretty interesting is its open architecture, which basically means it's designed to be easily upgraded in the future.
So they can swap out or add new tech as it becomes available.
Yep. Keeps it relevant for longer. And I think it also means, different companies can potentially contribute to the tech, so less reliance on a single supplier.
Interesting. Strategically, does all of this point to a specific focus?
From everything we've seen, it seems pretty clear that the F-47 is heavily geared toward the Indo-Pacific region.
Makes sense given current geopolitical trends.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about Boeing for a second, because their role in this is fascinating.
They snagged this initial contract, which is worth $20 billion.
Right, but experts are predicting that this could ultimately balloon to hundreds of billions of dollars over the F-47's lifetime.
So a huge deal for Boeing, potentially a program-defining program for them.
Absolutely, and remember, they beat out Lockheed Martin, which is no small feat.
Very competitive bidding process.
Yeah. But it's worth mentioning that Boeing's defense sector has had some challenges recently, some high-profile issues with other programs.
Yeah, some analysts are definitely raising that as a point of concern.
For sure, but if you listen to President Trump's Secretary Hegseth and General Alvin, they're all extremely positive about this. They're really highlighting the technological superiority that the F-47 brings, ensuring air dominance. And a key point that they keep making is that it'll be more cost-effective than the F-22.
That's a big claim.
It is, and predictably, some experts are already pushing back on that.
Right, folks like Dan Grazier, who we've mentioned before, he's questioning the need for another manned fighter at all, given the increasing emphasis on drones and space-based systems.
Yeah. And he's also not convinced about those cost projections. He thinks it's likely to see cost overruns down the line.
Which wouldn't be surprising given the history of these big defense programs.
Right. But on the other hand, there are experts who are really excited about that quarterback concept we talked about.
The F-47 leading a pack of drones?
Exactly. They see that as a potentially game-changing advantage in future conflicts.
There's also some speculation about the name F-47. Some people think it might be a deliberate nod to Trump being the 47th president.
Oh, interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, and there are also some design buffs who are pointing out similarities between the F-47 and that bird of prey stealth demonstrator that Boeing developed back in the 90s.
So maybe some design inspiration there.
Possibly, and one score I think is important to highlight here is retired Brigadier General John Teichert, who's been very vocal about the need for this kind of technological leap to maintain an edge over adversaries like China.
So he sees this as absolutely essential.
Yeah, he really emphasizes that point.
Okay, so let's step back for a second and think about the broader implications of all of this, because they're pretty significant.
Yeah, this isn't just about a new plane, it's about a lot more.
Right, so from a national security standpoint, this is about maintaining American air superiority, deterring potential adversaries, and being able to project power globally.
With a very clear eye on China.
Oh, absolutely. And then there's the issue of defense spending, because this program is going to require a substantial investment. It's going to have a big impact on the defense budget.
And that claim about being more cost-effective than the F-22, that's still a big question mark.
Huge question mark. And on the international stage, this sends a very clear message to both our allies and our potential adversaries.
Signal of strength and commitment.
Exactly. And, President Trump even mentioned the idea of selling toned-down versions of the F-47 to allies.
Which raises some interesting questions about technology transfer.
Yeah, and, could potentially fuel even more competition in the global military aviation market.
It's a complex landscape.
It really is. Okay, so lastly, I think it's helpful to understand where this program came from and what the timeline looks like going forward.
Yeah, how did we get here?
Well, the roots of the F-47 actually go back to the mid-2010s with a concept called Penetrating Counter-Air, or PCA.
Okay, PCO.
And that built on even earlier work by DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency.
Those are the folks who are always working on cutting-edge experimental stuff.
Exactly. And that experimental work led to the development of a bunch of different X-planes, those super-secret test aircraft.
So years of behind-the-scenes work.
Yeah, tons of it. And now the Air Force is saying they're aiming for operational deployment of the F-47 before the end of the decade, possibly as early as 2029.
Ambitious timeline.
Yeah, and President Trump has made it very clear that he expects to see a fleet of these things in the air before he leaves office in January of 2029.
So a lot of pressure to deliver.
Definitely. And the initial phase of the program is going to focus on building and rigorously testing those first few prototype aircraft.
The EMD phase, engineering and manufacturing development.
Right. So to recap for our listeners, we've got this F-47, which is being presented as a revolutionary sixth-generation fighter.
At the heart of this network of unmanned systems.
Right, with Boeing leading the charge.
Massive undertaking for them.
Huge. And of course, there's already debate among the experts about, whether this is even necessary, how much it's going to cost, and what the long-term implications are for national security and the global balance of power.
All very valid questions.
Yeah, a lot to think about. And it really makes you wonder, given how quickly technology is advancing and how much AI is being integrated into military systems, what will air dominance actually look like in the decades to come?
That's the real question. What does the future of air power hold? And what's the right mix of manned and unmanned systems? Finding that balance is going to be crucial.
It's going to be fascinating to watch it all unfold, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening, everybody.